Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of the 33 Fuel vlog. My name is Warren. I'm one of the co-founders here at 33 Fuel, and today it gives me great pleasure to be your host for this conversation with Dr. Ian Walker. By day, in his professional life, Dr. Ian Walker is a professor of environmental psychology at the University of Bath, where he specialises in transport infrastructure and how to improve that infrastructure to encourage people to make positive habits, positive decisions, to increase the use of active travel. So by that, we're talking walking, we're talking running, and we're talking cycling. And in the same time, to decrease reliance on the car. That's the professional side of Dr. Walker. When he's not at work, you'll probably find him on his bike. He likes nothing more than cycling a long way. Literally hundreds, if not ideally thousands of kilometres. Having racked up, I believe, 25,000 kilometres this year already on Strava, Dr. Walker has most recently set the new Guinness World Record for the fastest solo bicycle crossing of Europe. He knocked out a cool 6,300 kilometres in 16 days, 20 hours and 59 minutes. This is almost 3 days faster than the previous record. More than this, he did it all solo and unsupported. There was no one to massage his legs. There was no one to mop his fevered brow at the end of a long day. There was no one to book his hotel for him. There was no one to do anything. Everything that required doing, from fixing punctures to eating sandwiches to getting to the hotel, he did it all himself. The rest of the time, he pedalled like a demon. What this gives us is a unique package. We have a man who understands what real physical endurance at the highest level is all about. And at the professional level, we have a man who understands what it takes to make great habits in people's lives and how to make them stick, while also removing negative habits. So that's what we're going to be going into in this podcast. How to make great habits that stick, that make massive and lasting positive change to your performance in your life. Because that's exactly what we're all about here at 33 Fuel. We're about giving athletes and people the best possible tools so that they can be the best possible versions of themselves they want to be. We do that with these podcasts and with our vlog, with our blog, with our social media, where we share great content like this that inspires, motivates and informs. And we do it in store at 33fuel.com with the best damned possible natural sports nutrition you will find anywhere. No junk, no fillers, all real food, natural, powerful, mighty stuff that absolutely raises your game. And all you've got to do is swap out what you were normally eating and eat this instead. So look, that's what we're about. Let's get on to this conversation with Dr. Ian Walker. The place I wanted to start with this is clearly going to be the cycling, which for you is, it's not just cycling, it's cycling a really, really bloody long way, which I believe is a technical term. It appears that your comfortable favourite distance appears to be around 6,000 kilometres, maybe 4 to 6, but the one that you've just really knocked out recently is you are officially Guinness World Record holder for the fastest ride across Europe, confirmed just about a week ago, I think, was it?
That's right, yes. Got all the evidence off to them quite a few weeks ago. They took their time having a look over it. I think they very thoroughly went through the enormous spreadsheet that I sent them and confirmed it a few days back.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's really nice to. I kept telling myself, oh no, if there's some technicality, then it's fine. I've still done it. But secretly, I did actually want the official confirmation.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So just to put the numbers into context for people, you'll know these well already. 6,300 kilometres across Europe. You're the Guinness World Record holder for the fastest ride across the continent. Took you through 10 countries, took you 16 days, 20 hours, 59 minutes. That is 377 kilometres a day, give or take. I'm sure that there's a little bit of pocket change in there, one way or the other. That would get you from the Arctic to Africa. at a rough stretch. And on top of this, as if people don't have their jaws on the floor already, and I'm sure some of them scratching their heads and going, why? Which we can come to in a minute. Solo and unsupported. This is no race across America, ride across America with a full support team in tow. This is you on your Todd, on your bike, knocking out 6,300 kilometres with what has to be very, very little sleep or ability to stop because the weather went in a direction you didn't fancy. So with all that in place, what brings you to rides like this, and what do they teach you?
Oh, well, there's two very, very big questions there. I mean, what brought me to this was kind of accidental. I was running. I used to run ultras, did quite a few 100-milers. If I'm 100% honest, I was probably better around the 50-mile mark. But yeah, you're a runner. There's something about that 100-mile distance that's just a bit magical and makes you want to do it. So I was doing that for a few years. And just one day, I literally just came across this race called the Transcontinental Race, which goes across Europe every summer. And I read an article about it. It was actually an article on Strava where they did this sort of photo essay describing the race. And it looked brutal and
I like that you say that with a smile on your face for anyone who's just got this in audio.
Oh, I mean, if anyone wants, just go and look for it. Search for Strava TCR Transcontinental Race number 4. Find the photo essay. It just looks amazing, but really tough. And there was something about the scale of that just captured me. There was something about the idea of, going from spending 1 or 2 days pushing myself to spending a couple of weeks pushing myself to make that huge leap to that next level of what would it be like to just be hundreds of miles from anywhere? What would it be like to be, in the middle of Macedonia at midnight on your own? And it just felt so huge and exciting that I just had to have a go. And so I literally just stopped running and started cycling the next day.
Did you have much of a background in cycling? Because surely you're going to have the aerobic engine, you've got the endurance, you've got the mentality. If you're running ultras that are taking you through the night, that's already putting you in that sort of place. But cycling requires quite a different physiology, activates different muscles. One doesn't necessarily translate readily to the other. How did you make the shift and how did you find it?
Yeah, there was quite a swap over. I mean, actually, I think something I now realise is I did it the right way round. So something I've heard of since is people who come from cycling, where they've got that big aerobic engine, like you say, and then they go into running, but go in hard and get injured. Because, of course, if you've got a body that lets you run for hours, but you've got muscles and bones that aren't used to it, running is so much more punishing than cycling, that's an easy way to get injured. So I did it the right way round. At least the way that's less likely to lead to broken ankles and things. But yeah, it was definitely a transition. And, over that first, 6-8 months, my speeds on the bike definitely were going upwards. My early rides, I'd get them done, but they weren't fast. Whereas now, 2-3 years later, my natural cruising speed is just so much higher than it used to be as I've made those adaptations. And it's been interesting. There's been changes I didn't expect. I'm considerably heavier now. I'm fitter than I ever was running, but I weigh more. I think there's more muscle involved in a way that maybe there isn't with running, for example.
Interesting. Because I mean, I know that sort of a preponderance or an excess of endurance exercise can make it hard to maintain muscle, but this is something we often talk with athletes and people about maintaining the correct body weight that they're looking for competition and the correct body composition. And endurance, some bodies really adapt to it well and hit their racing weight quite naturally. Others take a lot of work. It sounds like you've got yourself into a very healthy place with whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I think so. I find my appetite sort of shoots up and down from time to time. Most of the time it's okay, and then I'll just get these days where I get home in the evening and just eat everything in the house. It's like a bear coming out of hibernation, and these things sort of just come upon me without any warning. But generally, yes, I've settled in okay.
Now, just to take a quick diversion into the world of nutrition while we're on it, I'm sure a lot of people might think, well, this is the 33 Fuel podcast, and sports nutrition is what we do. Here's a guy who's cycling right the way across Europe, massive distances. Let's throw a few curveballs in there for people, because a self-supported ride means a different approach to nutrition. It needs to be flexible in line with the real world. So come on, hit us with some of the things that were your go-to fuels and the situation you were in terms of fueling for this ride.
Oh man, I mean, this is the big thing that changes when you go unsupported. You have so few options. One of the things I realized is you can either eat well or you can eat quickly. You cannot do both. If you want good food, you've got to stop, you've got to go and look for it, you've got to buy it. If someone's cooking, you've got to sit down and wait. And, this just swallows time. Even a supermarket swallows time, especially when you're crossing Europe, because every 2 days you're in a new country, you don't know what they sell, you don't know what the packets look like, you don't know what the nutritional information is in anything. So every day or 2 days, you're having to relearn the entire supermarket system. They all sell fruit differently. It's just these little things that eat up your time. So what that means is if you want to move quick, you have to eat stuff that's by the side of the road. And that pretty much means petrol stations. And if you look around petrol stations, they tend not to be brilliant for what they provide.
They're not normally known as being, if you were looking for a good square meal and a bit of something nice and fresh, the petrol station is kind of last on your list most of the time.
Yeah, and something I've really come to appreciate is that British ones are actually quite good. The minute you get outside Britain, it can be hard even to find a sandwich. A lot of the time in Eastern Europe, I was just eating pretzels or chocolate bars or cakes and things like this. I just ate so much absolute crap. I mean, there were some good places. So one of the things I've found in the past is that no matter how tired I get and no matter how sick of food I am, which I'll come on to in a second, I can always manage things like milkshake and yogurt. They always go down really well. And it turns out the best place in the world for yogurt is Latvia.
No way.
Latvian supermarkets sell kilogram bags of yogurt. And so with one of those, you can get 1,000 calories down your face in less than 20 seconds. Which is just the most
I've got this image of you, probably still on the bike, cycling away from a Latvian supermarket at speed, squeezing like one bitten off whole air, squeezing an entire kilo bag like toothpaste into your mouth. Is that quite accurate?
Except for the riding bit, that's exactly what happened. Come out, take the top off, squeeze the whole thing down. And I'm not joking about 20 seconds. It would be 20 seconds to swallow this entire kilogram and then move on to the second course. So Latvian yogurt was amazing, but it got to a point after maybe the best part of 2 weeks where I was absolutely sick of eating. It became an absolute chore. I was getting through 8 or 10,000 calories a day, and it just becomes really tedious, especially when all you can eat is junk. So towards the end in Spain, I really, really was relying on petrol stations and the occasional bakery. And so, I've got this really strong memory in northern Spain, in Burgos, which people might have heard of because it's on the old pilgrimage route. And I checked into this hotel quite late at night. And I just remember sitting there thinking, I really, really want to be in that bed, but I've got to get up in about 3.5 hours. And I can't get up and get moving unless I've eaten something. And then just this look of resignation on my face as I just slowly forced a Swiss roll down my mouth in one big motion. It's another 1,000 calories, here we go. And just crammed that down my face with a load of peanuts and then crawled into bed.
Well, it's quite the balance though, isn't it? Because, I've heard this from Atlantic rowers, particularly on the smaller teams, where you may be doing 2 or 3 hours on, 2 or 3 hours off for days and days and days, which sounds reasonable-ish, given the extremity of the circumstance, until you put yourself in it. Like 2 hours, you can sleep or eat. You can't do both, but during 24 hours, you need to do both, and you may not want to do the one you need to do at the time you need to do it.
Mm.
And it sounds like you were in a similar place with your ride. And how do you balance that requirement against this sort of presumably a constant nagging reminder, clock's ticking every second?
I think part of it was I just had to start viewing my body as a machine. It was like if you were driving a car, you'd never imagine you could get across the continent without putting fuel in it. And I just had to treat myself the same. But you start to pay a price. I mean, thankfully, not in any sort of soiled short sort of way. But towards the end, my mouth was so swollen and sore that I really was down to only being able to eat liquids because everything hurt. My tongue was inflamed, all the skin was cracked around my mouth. It was a pretty miserable experience.
That must have been hard as well, and also good that you must have been in a strong place to manage that sort of a diet because it's not just calories, is it? You need the nutrients, you need everything else to keep the body going. You're not just depleting the calories in the body, you're depleting everything else. So was there anything specific you did to ready yourself in advance, knowing that what was coming up was going to be calories you were going to hit, but nutrients you were going to struggle?
Do I didn't think about that enough, and I probably should have given it a bit more thought. In advance, I did, for maybe a week or so before I left, I did spend some time just trying to eat more, trying to pack some weight on, which really didn't work. I think because my training was at such a point, I think my metabolism was just thrumming away, and I ate like a pig and managed to put on 1 kilogram in the run-up. It was just crazy how it just vanished straight away. But yeah, I didn't give enough thought to nutrition. And I think that's probably what let me down and probably why I got in such a bit of a mess. Swollen mouth, cracked skin, that kind of thing. I probably should have given it a bit more thought.
Well, was there a bit of how was the recovery afterwards? Because the body, and this is not just nutrition, this is everything. The body's been through. Clearly, you're well habituated to the distances. This was not like you got on a bike and thought, I'm going to ride across Europe in one hit for the first time. You've got multiple 4,000 kilometre rides behind you. You're doing 25,000 kilometres a year on average on your bike by then anyway. You're used to it. But even so, the body's taken a pounding, as has the mind, as has your sleep rhythms, as has everything. How was the re-entry back into the sort of normal world again after an event like this?
I think probably this one was very slightly easier than the previous things I've done. So the last year I did a race called the North Cape 4000, which was Italy up to the top of Norway. The previous year I'd done this transcontinental. And I think in both of those, I pushed myself really hard. I was inexperienced at this ultra distance bike stuff. So I just pushed myself hard in a kind of, let's really push hard sort of way. And so typically I'd ride into the small hours in the morning, then grab a little bit of sleep and get going again. And I was very much making it up as I went along. And then as I shifted from that kind of 4,000 kilometre riding to this 6,000 plus, so it's 1.5 times what I'd done before, I thought, well, that's probably not sustainable. If I think what I was like, when I finished the North Cape 4000 race last year, I was so tired on that first morning, I almost couldn't move the bags under my eyes enough to get her contact lenses in. It's almost like a three-handed job, 2 hands to pull the bags apart and 1 hand to shove the contact lens in. So I got myself in a complete mess from pushing so hard, and I thought, well, if I'm going to go a further distance, I need to be more disciplined. I'll have more of a strategy. And there were a couple of bits of this that worked out really well. So I deliberately set myself up to try and ride in a way that I thought I could maintain indefinitely, rather than just go hell for leather and crash after 10 days. So I was riding easier, well, not easier pace, but taking better breaks, taking a proper break in the evening. I would have 6.5 hours off the bike of an evening, because I knew that if I did less than that, I'd be starting to build up fatigue in a way that I couldn't maintain long term. So that made quite a big difference.
So this second one, you've come out of it the record attempt. You've come out in a more comfortable place, and to go back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, you were talking about the layout of supermarkets, how it changes from country to country, how people or how you maybe get used to recognizing products, labels, translating which aisles where, etc., etc., which I'm guessing might lead us very nicely into your day job as an environmental psychologist. Have I identified that sort of link correctly?
Not quite. So yeah, no, my day job, I am an environmental psychologist, but not that kind.
I realised it wasn't necessarily your specialist area, but I just thought the way you were referring to the sort of habits and pathways through the
Oh,
supermarket,
well, habits.
I wondered if there was a crossover to
Yeah.
your field, albeit not your speciality within that field.
No, well, there is. As soon as you start talking about habits, there's absolutely a crossover. And one of the things that was really interesting there, I've worked on habits for 13, 14 years now. And the way we think of a habit as psychologists is it's something that you do kind of automatically because your situation has triggered it. So, the classic example would be something like late in the evening, you don't really think through the whole question of, should I brush my teeth? You just kind of automatically go in the bathroom and start doing it because that's what you do at that time of day. And the behavior just gets triggered by the situation. Where that became really important for me personally is the training. So I do most of my training on my daily commute to and from work. And it's incredible as an illustration of just how these habits play a role. In fact, I've actually literally had an experience this morning that tells this story really well, just how powerful habits are. So on my usual route, I knew that they'd closed one of the roads because they're fitting some new infrastructure. And so I knew this in advance. Last night, I got the map out and looked on the website and planned an alternative route. And this morning, I went down and unthinkingly followed my usual route and eventually hit a dead end and had to turn around and do a huge detour. So I'd completely unthinkingly, habitually, just repeated my everyday behavior. Now, the reason that's important is through a lot of deliberate practice, my everyday behavior is a really useful one, which is get on the bike and ride. And that's just this great illustration of how, if you want to, you can kind of take control of this habitual process and set yourself up with good habits. And in my case, I've very deliberately created a daily routine, a daily habit of getting out and riding my bike. And that's how I get the training in that lets me do these kind of things.
Well, that is, you've literally done all the work for me there in totally introducing the kind of things you do and how, with this show, we can look at the extreme challenges you've done, the extreme things you've achieved, but what other people can learn from this to improve their own habits from your lessons on not just being someone who actually delivers on those habits, but you have the understanding of how habit formation works in the first place so you can use it to your advantage. So that's really where we want to go with this.
Yeah.
Where would you recommend as the best place to start? I mean, do people need to begin by thinking, okay, well, actually let's get conscious about what my habits are and find out good from bad, decide, okay, what do I want to keep? What do I want to change? What do I want to lose? Or what would you recommend as a starting point for this?
Yeah, I think you've hit on something important there, which is to try and get more mindful about it. This is slightly crude, but basically the way your mind does anything falls into one of these two categories of the more sort of automatic, unconscious, irrational side, your quick, rapid decisions, and your slower, more deliberate, conscious side. One of the other places I see this a lot actually is I do work on home energy conservation. And it's really interesting. We divide home energy into exactly those two types. There's what we call investment behaviors, which is like choosing a new appliance, which is very deliberate. You only do it every now and again. You think through it. You look at the costs and benefits. That's a very different part of your mind than the everyday activity of turning that appliance on. Turning on the kettle is a different part of your mind to choosing the kettle. One's quick and automatic and just part of your daily routine. One of them is slow and deliberate and economic. So it's important to recognize that first and to ask yourself, well, of these behaviours I want to shift, what type is it? Is it that sort of fast, automatic, unthinking type 1 sort of behaviour, or is it that slower, more deliberate type 2? If it's the type 2, it's fine. You're in control of that. That's not a problem. Just decide what you want out of life and go with it. That's all.
Is that because you've got more time, literally there is more time in that decision happening for you to go, okay, this is not something I want to be making a decision on, I want to behave in a different way, but it's all unfolding quite slowly, so as long as you're mindful about it, you've got a chance to spot it and divert course.
Yes, and it's unusual that those kind of behaviours will be out of kilter with your attitudes or your values or your beliefs, whereas actually it's quite common that your more everyday behaviours will actually be out of kilter with what you think. So one of the first studies we ever did on this, we actually found that the people who commute to this university, in general, the people who were most worried about the environment drove to work more. Their behaviour and their attitudes were completely out of kilter, and you can explain that because they're stuck in a habitual state. They'd chosen the behaviour years ago, and then over the years, as they were every day making the same journey to the same workplace from the same home, the attitudes have shifted, but the behaviours stayed crystallised.
And almost in a way, could there be a situation there where people almost disassociate? Their own habitual car use is something well, of course they're aware they're doing it, but they're not associating that with their work to make things better for the environment, which is what their professional lives are built on.
Yeah, and even if you want to make the change, in the same way that this morning I wanted to travel a different route, it still didn't happen. I genuinely wanted to go a different route to work. It did not happen because my everyday habits kicked in. So if your behaviour is more of that sort that you want to shift, then it's a different process. By far, the best thing, based on research, is to shift those behaviours at a time when your routines are being disrupted. So to give you a really obvious example, this morning, there's no way I could have automatically just repeated my everyday routine if I'd moved house at the weekend. So that kind of big disruptive event that shakes up the context of your behaviour, that's the best thing you can do to break your habits. And we've done a whole bunch of research on that kind of thing. Failing that, you can make an attempt to try and take control of the process. So there's actually something called implementation intentions, which is based on some work by a German researcher a few years ago. And it's the idea that you deliberately set yourself up with the behaviour and the trigger. So you say to yourself something like, okay, every time I see such and such a thing, or every time this happens, I will do this. And you make it in a very explicit statement, so building on what you said about being mindful about this, you very deliberately say this, every morning I will get the bike out, for example. And that works. It's really it sounds simple, but it's surprisingly successful and surprisingly powerful across a whole range of behaviours. The only things you've got to watch out for is that the trigger has to be clear and specific so you can tell when it happens, and the behaviour has to be clear and specific so you can tell if you're doing it or not. So where it goes wrong is when people use vague triggers and vague behaviours. So they'll say something like, in the future, which is very vague, I will eat better or be more active. And you can't tell if you're doing those. Whereas if it is every lunchtime, I will eat a salad, you know if the trigger's happened and you know if you're doing the behaviour. So as long as those two are specific, you can take control of those habitual processes by making those deliberate decisions.
And do these need to be, can they be big things or small things? I mean, are these scale dependent, or are they things, because there are some people who want to make huge changes and might need to break them down into smaller, more manageable ones. Otherwise there can be too much risk of, you might fail on something that's just too onerous and then you don't complete the process. Other people might simply be looking to improve a couple of little areas. So is there a scale on this, or can it be applied to both really big life changes and just small marginal gain style improvements?
Well, I think in principle, it can be both. I'm not saying any of this is easy, but it can in principle be anything. The key is one of the keys is being motivated. You've got to want this. But then on top of that, there's also setting yourself up to succeed, or maybe better, setting yourself up not to fail. Because there are various things that will encourage you to fall back into your old ways. So we published a paper about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was able to actually call the paper in a scientific journal. I was able to call the paper "Old Habits Die Hard," because we actually demonstrated for the first time that is literally true. So if you take someone and you change their context, like I said, so in this case, this was actually a workplace that had moved from one city to another. So every single person in that workplace had their routines broken. They could no longer just repeat their daily commute. They had to start afresh. So we knew that everybody had their old habits disrupted. But what we found is, even though their behavior all changed on that day, the underlying desire to do the old behavior didn't just stop. It faded over time. And so that shows that even when you manage to break your behavior in the short term, that desire, that tendency to fall back into your old ways lingers around for a few weeks. And we didn't measure it exactly, but we know it's at least 4 weeks, if not longer, with these people we studied.
Now, does this bring us into the world of willpower and motivation with the sort of a very general idea that willpower will get you started, but it won't finish the job? There needs to be something else. Otherwise, it's very likely the old habits will come back. Are those things related? Have you seen that?
Yeah, I'd say that's exactly what I was just thinking about, really. That, yeah, you could really want to change an everyday behavior, but just wanting it will probably not work for most people. Yeah, there'll be the exception. Absolutely, there'll be the person who quits smoking cold turkey or whatever it might be. But for most people, it's not as easy as that. And like I say, the key really is setting yourself up to succeed. So taking advantage of existing breaks in your routines, moving house, new job, having a child, things like this, they're all opportunities that are going to shake your life up anyway. So why not use them to shift your everyday routines? And then recognizing that you're probably going to fall back into your old ways and putting things in place so that doesn't happen. I mean, just as a really extreme one, which I know won't apply to everyone, but here's an extreme one. Sell your car. If it's not outside the house anymore, you can't just unthinkingly get into it tomorrow. And maybe not everybody would be prepared to go that far, but it's the kind of thing you might think about. How can I stop myself Monday morning when I automatically want to just start doing this?
And you're right as well. To use the car example, you could very much want to stop using the car. You could logically work out that it was very possible, or you could cut it in half or whatever. And then, day 1, 2, 3 go really well. Day 4, it's tipping it down with rain and you have a heavy bag. If the car's still there, that old habit just suddenly looks really, really tempting.
Absolutely. And you're right back into your old pattern at that point. We also do this wrong. Sorry, we also do this wrong at sort of an institutional level. So, we know that it takes weeks for an old habit to break and a new habit to bed in. And yet, what do we do, say government level, local government, what do we do when we want someone to change their behaviour? We have a day of action. We'll have active travel day or bike to work week. And, that's not enough. The research all shows that that's not going to break an old habit and bed a new one in. How long do you have to do something before it would feel weird not to do it? And the answer is weeks.
So does something, that's a really good point that you're right, because it's a day, bike to work day or whatever, well, everyone does it for a day. There is no change involved at all.
Yeah.
And not just thinking about it now that you've said it, even I would not see that as even initiating a change. I'm doing it for a day. That's the point. Mm-hmm. It's the abnormality, not the normality.
Yeah.
But what about an initiative like a dry January or a veganuary or whatever, where people may make a very noticeable change with alcohol or change with what they eat for a month? I mean, I don't know that many people go into these with the idea that I'm going to do this, I'm suddenly going to stop drinking forever, or I'm going to become vegan full time. I think it's maybe seen again as a temporary experiment, but is that more in the line of the way that things need to be to create a lasting change?
That's a really interesting question. Do you know, I've not come across much research that has actually picked that apart. I think based on what I've seen anecdotally, that you're dead right. People go into it, they know it's just for January. They know it's going to come to an end. I wouldn't be surprised if some people have a blowout planned for the 1st of February. But then, even if that's all it did, I can potentially see some benefit. So, to get very psychologist about this for a second, one of the things we talk about a lot as being a hugely important factor in people's behaviour is what we call self-efficacy and response efficacy. So self-efficacy is the extent to which you believe you are capable of doing something. And if you don't believe you're capable of doing something, it is not going to happen. It's so important. And then response efficacy is, does doing this thing get the outcome that I want? Is the response going to work? So do I work and does the response work? And I think what I'd be really interested to explore further is, do things like dry January or veganuary help develop those things? They might not be an end in themselves, but they're a necessary precursor to behaviour. So does going dry for a month show you that actually you can go out with your friends and not drink alcohol? That you do have the self-efficacy to not do that? And so that's what I'm thinking that these kind of initiatives might be doing. And I'd really love it if we could get a chance to pick that apart. It's possible people have already studied this, but they're the sort of directions I'd be interested to explore.
Yeah, no, it's certainly, I mean, and this is totally anecdotal just from seeing people do it. I know people who've certainly done the blowout right at the end and moan and grumble their way through the whole thing, and that's as much character as anything else. They need to do the moaning and grumbling in order to get themselves through it. And if they're not telling everyone how much they're hating it, they're not going to get through it. It's just part of their makeup. But it does make the point that you do not have to automatically drink at a social function if you don't fancy it. You do not automatically have to put meat in 90% of your meals, or whatever it may be. Therefore, those are things that once you've built that, as you would put it in psychological terms, that self-efficacy.
Whichever you prefer.
Efficacy. So I was doing an Italian exam last week and working on pronunciation. I seem to have messed up my English into the bargain as well, but that's a whole other story. But you then build that belief that it's possible. And what I'm really interested in here is it's a simple point, but I think it resonates so much. If you don't believe you can do it, you're not going to do it. So whether that is run a marathon, run 100 miles, go on a diet, use your car less, whatever change you decide to make. So have you got any thoughts or input on maybe identifying what those beliefs about yourself are, and B, are they beliefs, if you don't believe you can do something, yet it is something you want to do, are there ways you can build that belief in order to be able to achieve the goal that you're ultimately looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to have to just draw on my own experience here, I think, which is the thing I've always found since I was running and then into the cycling is just looking at what I have done and realizing you can always do that a bit more. So, when I started running, I think as with a lot of people, the idea of running a marathon just seemed impossible. And then 6 months after that, when you've run 50 miles, you go, oh, actually, a marathon was trivial. And then once you've done 100 miles, you think, actually, that 50 was easy, wasn't it? And then, I have at some point run the best part of 200 miles, and you think, oh, actually, 100 is not asking that much. And, once you've sort of become aware of that process, or once I became aware of that process, it showed me that, well, everything that at some point I thought was impossible actually now looks easy in the rearview mirror. And so that's got to be true of everything else I come across in the future. Riding 4,000 kilometers, it feels hard, but I know I can always do 4,001. If I can do 4,001, I know I can do 4,002. And if I keep going that way, pretty soon 4,000 will look easy. And that's this kind of mindset I have that sort of helps me handle these things, I think.
No, that's it's a very good point that, you were obviously able to identify for yourself, I've achieved this, therefore that would suggest I can achieve this next thing that I don't believe I can do. But this then also maybe comes back into, if people are looking to make a change, whether it's, weight, training, diet, whatever they may want to do, work, life, professional, the whole thing, if you're looking to make a change, does your experience suggest that it's maybe a good idea to break it down into increments, so that, if you were to suddenly go, right, I'm going to run 100 miles, but you haven't run 5, that's quite a lot. Now, maybe you don't need to run 95 to prove you can do 100, but
Yeah.
I mean, how would you recommend people build towards, let's just say, significant lasting change that sticks, whether it be, professional, personal, fitness, whatever it may be?
Oh, I mean, that's a big question, and I think it's probably one I'm better answering, as me rather than as a psychologist, because I don't know what would be, say, the organizational psychologist's answer to that. Yeah, I think the idea of breaking things down is hugely important, and something I've found from my own experience of doing long, especially the cycling, where it's just day after day after day, is breaking things down. One of the pleasures of it for me is the breaking things down to the simplest possible task. So, for example, on the last couple of long bike rides, my mantra in the preparation was always, I don't want to do any thinking on the road. I do all my thinking at home. So the route was planned meticulously. I knew where every shop and petrol station was the entire way. I probably had a pretty good idea of where I was going to stop, for how long. So there was zero thinking. So what it meant is, when I was out on the road, I didn't have to think. I was free from that. And I could do that thing that a lot of sports people realize, which is you've got to just focus on the process. And so becoming very completely process orientated became hugely important for me. And I think that's something that might start to translate across to the situations you're thinking of, like career success or something like that. There isn't a thing you can do today that is going to give you career success, but there probably is a right choice of what you do today. And so eventual success is the accumulation of lots and lots of right decisions. And you've got to focus on that process. What is the right option right now? Sport's easier. Sport's much easier. Basically, am I going at the right speed? Have I eaten enough? Have I drunk enough? Do I need a rest? As long as you're asking yourself those 4 questions over and over, you'll be fine. And that's essentially the process. Am I on the right route? Let's add that one in. As long as you ask yourself that handful of very simple questions, then eventual success will appear. Career success, something like that, it may be a bit harder. It's certainly a bit more nebulous, because we've not all agreed what the end goal is, like we have with sport. And one of the great things about sport is we've all agreed what the system is. We've all agreed the person who gets there first is the best. And so that, there's that lovely agreement that we don't necessarily have in other spheres of our lives. But as long as you're satisfied of what outcome you want to get to, you've then got to kind of push that aside, not focus on that outcome, and just really get stuck into the process. What can I do today? What can I do right now that's going to be the best choice to get me one tiny step further towards that goal?
And I think as well, what you said there, something you said earlier about you need clarity around what it is you want to do. So what is the behaviour I want to make happen? And you need clarity around your trigger. So people may say, I want to lose weight. I want to run faster. I want to earn more in my job, whatever it might be. Am I right in thinking that, with everything you've been talking about, those are too general?
Yeah, I think so. If you think about almost any of these things, I want to weigh less, I want to be happier, whatever it might be, how do you know if you've done it? Whereas, of course, if you've got something more concrete, I want to lose 5 kilograms. I want to be promoted within 18 months. They're not necessarily easy, but at least you know if you've done it. And that ability to monitor your own behaviour is really important. What's interesting, just as a little bit of an aside, But there are some very popular and quite influential models of behavior change. And in particular, there's this model known as the stages of change, which says you sit at one of several stages in terms of changing your behavior. All the way down at the bottom is what they call pre-contemplation. So you've not even thought there's an issue. And then all the way up at the top is that final stage. You've changed your behavior, you're maintaining a new way of life, and so on. And this makes a lot of sense. And it gives you the idea that depending what stage a person is in, they need different types of support, for example. So a person who's pre-contemplative, who's not even realised there's an issue, they need to be told there's a problem. Whereas the person who's already in the process of trying to shift their behaviour, you don't need to tell them there's a problem. They've already bought that. They need practical advice on how to make that shift. So it all makes a load of sense. And then there was then years of consternation of why can't we make people's behaviour change when we use this? And I think a big part of it turned out to be that model was developed from looking at smoking. And the thing with smoking is you can tell if you're doing it or not. And so people took a model that was developed on a really, really obvious concrete behaviour, and they started applying it to all these other things like travel better, eat better, be more physically active, with these incredibly vague goals. And you can't tell if you're doing them in the same way you can tell you've given up smoking.
You're absolutely right. Smoking, who would ever thought there would be a parallel between races and smoking? But they're completely binary. You've finished the race or you haven't.
Yes.
You are smoking or you are not. Now, whereas in racing, okay, there are DNFs, there is a halfway house of sorts, but there's not really. You finished it or you haven't. You're smoking or you're not. You're right, completely binary, and I think that comes back to what you said earlier about that is the one area where racing will differ from real life. Not real life. I mean, to quote,
I know what you mean.
To quote Steve McQueen, what was it? Racing is life. Everything else is just waiting. So it all depends on your perception. But in the broader scope of the rest of our lives outside of racing, things are not necessarily as binary. But to refer to your earlier point, okay, it's not about lose weight, have a better job, do this. Become specific. Create something that is as binary as that finish line.
Yeah.
To go back to where you introduced this idea. Something that you can tell whether you've done it or not.
And critically, to pick up on something you said a couple of minutes ago, once you've then got that, you can start working out the steps in between. So if the end goal is, I will run this race on the 1st of August, you can work backwards from that because you've got your very concrete thing you'll know if you've done that or not, but you can work backwards from there to where you are. Whereas if it's just, at some point I will run a race, I will one day do 100, you're setting yourself up to fail again.
Now, so here we come to, accountability, put the line in the sand, put the date in it, maybe tell people about it. Then you've got maybe fear of people are going to think, well, he didn't follow through. You've now got to turn up.
There's some really good research on public commitment.
Is there?
Public commitment is a powerful influence.
And just could you sort of go into that a little bit more? 'Cause I mean, I've read some stuff about it, but I'm sure some people may be coming across this idea for the first time, and you'll know an awful lot more than me. Can you give us a bit more about the power of public commitment?
Well, as I understand it, it's pretty simple. If you tell people, then you're more likely to do it because it just introduces a social pressure that wasn't there before. There's that thought of having to tell people you didn't do it, potentially the support of people offering help along the way. But probably most of all, it's just that thought of, oh God, I've got to tell everyone I didn't do it. It's a very motivating thing.
So you're telling people you're going to do it, that can help you maintain your change and maybe sort of win some of the battle against, as the willpower starts to wane, this accountability might keep you going a little longer to get you over that hump to the point where something can bed in as a habit.
Exactly, and that's in many ways is the goal we want. As somebody who tries to influence population's behaviour, the best thing you can get is a shift so that the good behaviour has become a habit, exactly like you said, and even better, if it can become a habit and this is the sport link, and become part of your self-identity. Because especially if you start thinking of yourself as a runner or an ultra runner, if that's who you are, if that's how you introduce yourself to people, if that's how you see yourself, then even more than just the habit, that's going to keep you on track. Because this is what I do.
And you don't want to say, well, I didn't, because actually you're the person who says they would. And I mean, in your own journey and experience, what do you think have been the most helpful habits that you've created for yourself that have helped you succeed, both in terms of, both professionally, but also in terms of your cycling? Because you're doing 25,000 kilometers a year by bicycle and a full-time job. It's not like you're only cycling. You've got an awful lot of things to fit in there. And when you do get on the bike, not only are you spending a lot of time doing it, you're not messing around either. So, you're pushing on that side. You've got a full professional career going as well. How have you, I don't know if it would be as simple as, could you give us your top 3 habits, or what have been, you think, the most important habits that you've implemented, changed, or used in the last few years to be where you are now?
Yeah, I think if I jump back to when I was running a few years ago, I think with hindsight, this was a pure accident, but I think one of the things that helped me, might not work for everyone, but one of the things that helped me was I started running most days. Even if it was just a quick 5K after work, I would generally go out and do something most days. And I think that helped me bed in the running habit. It started to become, and I mentioned earlier this idea of feeling weird if you don't do it. And that is actually quite a good measure of whether something is a habit. If it feels weird not to do it, and that's how I got to that stage with the running, that to come home in the evening and not go for a run started to feel like something was out of kilter. And I think it was the frequency. If I'd been running, let's say, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I don't think it would have quite got to that stage. So the frequent repetition for me was quite important. What's then built on that is, again, when I was running, I started using it to commute. So I used to live about 11 kilometers from work, and I used to have a fantastic route. Just an amazing cross-country trail route with some fantastic climbs and just the best running. And I did that twice a day. I'd run to and from work every day. That was how I got to work. And so not only did it start to feel weird if I didn't do it, it was actually inconvenient if I didn't run every day, because, now I've got to worry about catching the bus, and, that's such a pain. So the repetition and making it part of my daily utility meant that it was habitual and useful. And then since I moved house, I now live 40 kilometers from work. I don't know why I'm gesturing at it, as if you can see it.
Well, this will be on video as well. So yeah, for anyone on the podcast,
here we go. Hang on. Here we go.
There's all the gesturing here. Oh, here we go. Your house is that direction.
Out of that window, if you might just see a dark ridge in the background. That's where I live. On a really good day, you can see Wales behind it, but there's a dark ridge over there, and I live there. So it's 40 kilometers away, and that move actually coincided with when I started cycling, just by pure coincidence. But again, it was so obvious to me at that point of, right, well, I can't run to work anymore because, a couple of marathons a day is a little bit cheeky. But yeah, the cycling, that's perfect. It's, hour and a half each way. And that just slipped in nicely. So I still had the frequent repetition of something that got a practical job done. And I think it's those two things together have really made it easy to bed this in.
And then on top of that, is there a further element that the daily cycling, given your real focus from what I've seen of your work on public transport infrastructure, changing people's habits around use of the car, making cities better for pedestrians, reducing emissions, all of that stuff. Does the bike play into that as well, in that to a degree, by spending time on the bike, you're informing yourself better for what the real world realities of certain changes and improvements can be, or even what options could be? It must be a good thinking space for that.
It is. There's such hot debates in the cycling world about, or even just the city planning world, about how we accommodate more active travel. It, obviously everyone expects me to say this because I ride a bike quite a lot, but I really, really think the bike should be a bigger part of our urban living in the future. The bulk of car journeys are short. The bulk of car journeys are one person traveling a short distance. If we just got some of those onto bikes, they would be quicker for the person doing them and healthier and cheaper and all that sort of stuff. And just imagine how much less clogged the roads would be. So it's for society, it's a no-brainer that the bike becomes an important part of the future. But as you say, there are some huge barriers to doing that. Some of the barriers are some of the things I've talked about. There's an identity barrier. To people who don't ride a bike, you've got to become a cyclist. That's the perception to them. I don't want to become one of them, because as we know, they all ride through red lights and they all do, and it's all that sort of out-group stereotyping prejudice that goes on. And that is a barrier. But one of the other barriers, and again, there's some quite nice research on this, particularly Rachel Aldred over in London has done some nice work on this. Just the feeling of it, or just watching a street and seeing how people on bikes get treated by motorists is a deterrent to people. And so, certainly my own experience of travelling actively quite a lot shapes that. And, the risk of making this a bit too grand, it probably is, I am a straight white middle-aged man. Generally, things go my way in life. It's probably the only place I can get experience regularly of being marginalised. And it probably would be a good thing if more people in my position tried this, try going out in public and leaving your car behind and using this other mode and just see how it feels to be marginalised. It's very eye-opening to have somebody, let's say, verbally abuse you just because of how you look, or to threaten your life just because of how you appear. That doesn't happen to me normally, and it's quite an instructive thing to happen.
That's a fascinating point, because, I'd never thought about it like that, but I'm in the same boat. And you get looked at a bit funny sometimes in running gear, but I live in central London. You could go out painted bright green and naked, and most people would not bat an eyelid. Some would even probably encourage it. But I am currently riding my bike less in terms of getting out for a good ride at the weekend or something like that on the road bike, because I've been spoiled over the summer. We spent 3 months working in Vancouver, which is quite the dream location for cycling and being in an urban environment, but being in the country immediately. And the traffic there is, compared to here, very light. The bike lanes are like motorways. Effectively, if you've come from cycling in the UK and you go over there, you're going to find it kind of like a bit of a paradise. I then was working in Tuscany, which again isn't, to be fair, the Italians they'll do the close pass thing. Yeah. They'll just do it twice as fast as we do it in the UK. There was a lot less traffic there. And so I've come back to London and I'm finding it a little hard to get back there because I know I'm going to get close past when I go out. And I've had 4 months of not having that. And it's been rather a luxury. And it's kind of like now, well, maybe I'll just get on the turbo, or maybe I'll just go for a run. Because I'll get up early on a Sunday, I'll go out, but by 9:30, the road's already starting to get busy from anywhere you can get to from central London. And those close passes are going to come, and there's a part of me that's just going, do I want that? What do you make around there? I know I've focused in specifically on the close pass there because you're right, you feel marginalised, you feel someone is effectively threatening your life for no bloody reason whatsoever. Yeah. And, you get, my barometer is the ones that make you swear involuntarily. Yeah. There are others that are close, but the ones that when you swear involuntarily, whatever that distance is, that's a close pass. I don't know. Is this something you would look at more? I'm fascinated by the whole thing.
This is really interesting because this is something I've been thinking and talking about quite a lot recently. If you're a psychologist or a social psychologist like me, you spend a lot of time drawing diagrams that have behaviour over on the right-hand side and like arrows pointing at it, trying to explain behavior. And a lot of the time, those arrows are the things I've been talking about: habit, self-efficacy, things like this that point here. And so if you've got more of this, you're more likely to do the behavior. And we spend all the time talking about things like that. Now, it's really hard for me to admit this as a psychologist, but that's probably the wrong approach. Probably the better approach is what the geographers have been doing all this time, which is to basically push all those things aside and do one zonking great arrow saying surrounding environment. Because it turns out the environment is probably more important. So, I'm thinking particularly there was an American study a few years ago which showed if you want to predict who rides a bike, don't ask them what their attitudes are, don't ask them what they think of it, don't ask how much they value physical activity. The question you ask is there a bike path? And that is the question that predicts who cycles and who doesn't. And it's the same here. If you want to predict who walks or who cycles or who does anything like those kind of modes, the question is it made easy and safe in your environment? Does the environment, and that include the social environment in that, but does the environment make this behaviour easy and safe? And if the answer is no, it's not going to happen. And if you look at Britain, cycling has plateaued for a long time at about 2% of trips. And so what that clearly shows us is there's about 2% of people who are prepared to put up with a lousy environment. That 2% that we've seen for so many years, that's the cycling in spite of a hostile environment. The classic comparison that everybody always makes is the Netherlands. They're not genetically different from us apart from their excessive height. They're not genetically more predisposed to cycle. It's just they've created an environment that makes it easy and normal and safe.
What would a percentage be if you were to compare, whether it's UK versus Netherlands or London versus Amsterdam or something like that?
Well, I've seen figures. Annoyingly, I can't quite remember off the top of my head where I read this last, but the typical figure in the Netherlands will be, if you take a person at random and say, have you ridden a bike in the past 2 weeks? It'll be something like 80 or 90% say yes. Whereas in Britain, it'll be something more like 10%.
Wow. So
I might be very slightly making those figures up, but it's that kind of difference.
A huge, huge difference. And a lot of that ultimately, so what you're saying is the sort of the cyclists that we'll see in the UK are the ones who'll put up with it.
Yeah. And critically, there's been some nice, again from the geography world, there's been some nice research coming out recently talking about the cause and effect of this and showing that there is a pathway that when the environment changes, the mind follows. So, in crude terms, if we were to do something ambitious, like, say, Chris Boardman wants to do in Manchester, if we were to do something ambitious to make active travel more possible, you get all the wailing and the screaming and, oh, but the sky will fall down and all. But what we know is that the attitudes follow the environment. So if the politicians have the nerve to follow through, 5 years down the line, everyone will be going, oh my God, what were we ever worried about? This is way better than it used to be. But unfortunately, people are a bit too willing to jump to short-term popular opinion rather than hold their nerve and give people what eventually they would actually prefer to have.
Well, just to round us out on this, it's something I saw on your Twitter feed, and I think these are all related. You had shown the picture of a back of a bus, and the back of a bus, I think it was a blue bus, so I don't know where that was, but it was written in English. It had a picture of a bicycle on the back and saying something like, cycling, ? Wouldn't you prefer to get the bus? It was something like that. It was basically encouraging cyclists to get off their bikes and into a bus, which, if I've remembered that correctly, reminds me of what is now, it's not even common, I think it's policy. Every London Underground station that has steps in it, where you could take the steps instead of the lift to get up from the platforms, literally has huge warnings by the steps. Warning, 102 steps, take the lift. It's maybe 1 or 2 minutes to walk up these stairs, and I have genuinely seen, young active people turned around by those signs. Now I know that so those signs are blatantly not helping anything, although maybe they are helping the Underground's insurance policy in that when someone does have a heart attack at the bottom of the stairs, they can say, well, we told them not to. Although ironically, if they did, the defibrillators are always at the top, so that's maybe something for them to be looking into. Are these things related? Have I got on the right theme with your tweet of the bus there, or have I managed to totally mangle everything?
I think there is a relationship. You know, what you're making me think of here is a conversation I've often had with my colleague Tim Gamble, who now works at Winchester, and we talk a lot about what cultures fear. And it's really interesting to look at how fear differs from one culture to another. So I know Tim's example is always open water. So in this country, we have a deep fear of open water. Whereas, according to him, you go to Sweden and there's signs everywhere saying, hey, have a swim. The example I keep noting is trains. In this country, we are really frightened of railways. They're all surrounded by massive fences. You know, they're cordoned off, and the fear that someone might go near one is clearly visible in our culture. If you go to Switzerland, they're just there. You can just go walk across them. There's no fear of railways there in the same way that there is here. So you can see these things manifested. And I fear that what we might be seeing is something similar with active travel. We subliminally send a message in the same way that we send a message that railways are incredibly deadly places. We send, which is to some extent true. We send a message that walking is hard. Like you say, oh, wouldn't you rather not do this? It's going to be really hard for you. We also then, and this is where it gets really interesting from a street design perspective, we then accidentally make it hard. So, for example, if you go and look at any built street, without ever meaning to, the designers have made it an incredibly difficult obstacle course for pedestrians. Every single time you need to go anywhere, you've got to stop and wait at the side of the road and press a button. And when you eventually are allowed to go, you can go halfway across the road where you've got to stop and do it all again. And then, oh, actually, no, you need to go to that corner. So you've got to do the whole process 3 more times across them. So it's like, 10 minutes to go from one side of the road to the other. Every time you cross a side road, the road has been flared so that the motorists don't need to slow down at all as they turn in and out. And so you're exposed to the danger of speeding cars by design. So we create a physical environment because we kind of fear active travel. We don't like it. We kind of culturally see the proper thing to do is to be in a car. And therefore we create a world where, without realizing it, we create a world that makes that self-fulfilling and discourages all this lovely, healthy, active travel that we really need more of. So I might have gone off on a bit of a tangent there. No.
I mean, it leaves me wondering. We produce our bars out in Italy, so we spend a lot of time out there working on stuff. And we've just come back from another trip, and Italy is not geared up to walking particularly. No. Their crossings they almost might as well not be there. Drivers will here. If the foot's on the crossing, people generally tend to stop. That's a habit. Italy, they're not out to kill you. They're just not really, it's not a thing. So they may stop, they may not. You take your life in your hands, you run across the road when you can. Pavements, few and far between, often very narrow.
Yeah.
Yet, cycling's not so bad, but again, narrow roads, close passing, etc. Yet somehow they're cycling and walking everywhere. There must be something else in the culture that encourages them to do that, because they don't seem totally car dependent, unlike a country like America, an extreme example, or parts of Dubai, where literally you can forget walking across the road because it's 10 lanes and there's one crossing like 3 miles away and that's it. So you might as well get in the car. But no, Ian, this has been absolutely fascinating. It's opened up so much, and I've enjoyed so much the journey from your own multi-thousand-mile record-breaking bike rides to the urban infrastructure of the UK and what that means for the health of the global population. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, no, it's been great to have a chat. I hope I haven't gone too far off topic.
Absolutely not. I say I've really loved the journey, and I think it fits brilliantly with the rides you've done, and perhaps a little insight into the kind of mental journey that one could undergo in a simple hour's snapshot of time on the bike as the brain flits around going from one thing to the next, all of it related.
Absolutely.
So look, thanks.
But yeah, great speaking to you.
No, and you, thank you for making the time today. And where is the best place for people to catch up with you? I mean, we'll put all of your links in the show notes below, but what are your preferred channels, websites, social media?
The two main ones. I am on Instagram. I'm at Ian Cycles a lot, but I'm not as active there. I'm very active on Twitter. I'm just at Ian Walker on Twitter, or the central place where everything is my website, which I keep reasonably up to date, which is drianwalker.com. Which I'm sorry it's drianwalker.com, but people had cyber squatted ianwalker.com, so I couldn't get it.
Well, it's all right. You've genuinely got the doctor bit, so I think you're allowed with that one.
Oh, maybe. It just feels a bit... I don't like having it in the name because it feels a bit... oh, look at me.
No, I think you've more than earned that and all the others. Links to all of those in the bottom. Ian Walker, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So there you have it, folks. Please give a big hand for Dr. Ian Walker, gentleman, scholar, and seriously excellent cyclist. If you want to connect with him, find out more about him, then do check out his links in the show notes below. And of course, remember, if you are looking for the finest, the best, the greatest natural sports nutrition, then you need to get yourself along to 33fuel.com ASAP. Unless, of course, you just happen to be the incredibly lucky athlete who is on the other side of London to me right now, who I need to make a special delivery to right now. And thanks to Dr. Walker's brilliant input, I have been inspired. I am not going to jump on a train and go over there later. I am not going to jump in the car and go over there later. I'm going to stick it in a pack and I'm going to run over to this bloke's door and hand it over in person. I'm going to get the fun of a personal meeting with one of our athletes, which is always great. But on top of that, I'm going to get the added double whammy. I get the smug glow of having been for a run and the smug glow of having also done a little bit to help the planet by not relying on any other motorised transport. Now, the only downside to all of this is part of my route seems to unavoidably look like taking me down the side of the A40. So I may also have a slight dull edge on that glow, thanks to all the fumes I'm going to inhale, but that's only a few hundred meters. So fingers crossed, wish me luck. Hopefully I will be here for another episode and will not have been struck down by emphysema after sucking on the car exhaust fumes at the side of the A40 during this run. So look, thanks for joining us. Enough of my waffle. Ian Walker, the man, thank you for making the time for that, and look forward to seeing you all for the next show.